you know, where I can't, I'm not really ready for the 2020 election. Because I don't get I'm not, I love many things about America. There are many things that are admirable, but like the 2 years of campaigning before the presidential election, I find a bit much. Canada has, Australia, Britain, whatever, have 6-week election campaigns. The last time around in Canada, the Conservative government, for some reason, decided they wanted to hold a 12-week election campaign. If they'd held a 6-week one, they would have won it. They lost. They lost because it went on for 12 weeks, and everyone was so bored and sick of it by then. But we have, so I find that very odd. I find it's like we're still, what is it, that congressional district in North Carolina? We're still trying to figure out who won that. It's like 4 months after the election, because that's the other thing. In Canada, we hold Election Day on Election Day. So we don't have this whole thing like in Florida where they're still doing manual recounts 6 weeks later and all the rest of it. But so I'm not really ready for it. And I agree with the thing from Nick Gillespie at Reason magazine that I was quoting at the beginning of the show, at the top of the show, that Trump has sort of changed the rules. Cory Booker was in my state, New Hampshire, this weekend, and he was down in Manchester, New Hampshire, the biggest city in the state, and he's traveling the early primary states. And he said, what's called me to run for president is because I think we need a revival of civic grace. And immediately I think, oh, God, knock it off, you complete phony. You're not running for president because you think we, quote, need a revival of civic grace. We need to reignite a more courageous empathy. I don't even get that. I don't even get whether empathy can be courageous. I don't know even whether empathy is ignited. Is empathy combustible? If you get enough sufficiently courageous, empathetic types in a room, do they spontaneously combust? This is just like the blather of political speak. No real person talks like this. For God's sake, man, get a grip on yourself. It's not even. This shouldn't even be a left-right thing. This is the danger for the Democrats in this election. It's the difference between Dennis Miller. I mentioned that I'd just done these hit shows with Dennis. We were like trying it out. We were in Reading, Pennsylvania, where beautiful theater, the Santander Theater, and Laurel and Hardy played there, and Abbott and Costello played there, and then Miller and Steyn. And I said, right there, that's the decline of America in 3 acts. Laurel and Hardy, Abbott and Costello, Miller and Steyn. But Dennis had this line where he said, whatever you feel about Trump, Trump's outer voice is the same as his inner voice. And that's actually, whereas he says Hillary Clinton doubts, he doubts that Hillary's inner voice has ever had a cup of coffee with her outer voice. And that's actually true for most political candidates. If you listen to Cory Booker doing all this rubbish, blathering twaddle, codswalloping nonsense in Manchester, New Hampshire, that he's running, what's called me to run for president? Well, no one called you to run for president. Don't call us, we'll call you, and no one called you. You called yourself to run for president. Is because we need to reignite a more courageous empathy. That's just sort of blurry, soft focus, twaddle words. I wouldn't even be reading this. I had no idea Cory Booker had set foot in my state. But Mr. Snerdley sent this thing through, and so I thought, oh, God, Snerdley sent me this thing. I'm going to have to read it, otherwise he'll get annoyed with me. And it's nonsense from beginning to end. And then he goes on, we need to understand that old African saying that if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. Oh, really? That's an old African saying, is it? Really, really. That's like Hillary when she's, it takes a village to raise a child. You know, that's an African saying. No African has ever actually said the African saying. And actually, no African wants to live in an African village. They've all moved out of the villages to these big shanty coastal megalopolises. So if you fly over West Africa at night, it just looks like one great coastal city of millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of people. So no African wants to live in an African village, so why we should pay any attention to fictitious proverbs about African villages. And incidentally, there's no such thing as an African saying, because they're all tribal sayings. So which part of Africa is it? Trevor Noah, before he started hosting that show in America and became totally boring, actually used to make jokes about the inability to distinguish between his part of South Africa and the parts of West Africa where they got the Ebola and all the rest of it running around. Which bit of Africa? What do you mean an African saying? There's no, so which bit of Africa is this? Because Africa's all tribal. So one tribe's got a saying and the saying is completely unknown to the other tribe. And incidentally, there's nothing like an old African saying that if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. Because as we all know, in Africa, politics is tribal and one tribe comes out on top by killing the other tribe. So they don't actually say sentimental things like this. Because like in Liberia, land of the freed slaves, for example, they, generally speaking, they don't go far together. They go far alone by killing the other guy. And if you've seen the Quentin Tarantino film where they slice off the ears to Stuck in the Middle with You, they slice off actually other body parts when they decide to rise up and kill the president for life in Liberia. And it all gets a little bit messier there because it's the ancient tribe. That actually is an authentic tribal belief that if you eat the private parts of the previous leader, his powers of leadership will pass on to you. I don't believe they actually do that here. I don't believe they chop off Barack Obama's or George W. Bush's and make the incoming leader eat them, but that's the way they do it in Liberia. Anyway, so so this whole phony thing, I don't know whether people are ready to go back to the fakeness of it. Come on, Cory Booker. There's someone real down there. Why talk in this fakey, stupid outside voice thing? Oh, a revival of civic grace. We need to understand fictitious old African sayings. I went to Costco and bought a job lot of general purpose African sayings for aspiring presidential candidates. It's all rubbish. It's all, what do you really think, man? Who's the real you? Deep down inside, is there a real you? Or is there just a dead husk who's been given these stupid, generalized, feel-good twaddle by his focus group guys? Where is the real, come on, man, there's got to be, I know you're having difficulty. You came out as heterosexual a couple of weeks ago. That's a courageous thing to do in the Democrat primary field. But what is the real you deep down underside? We can't. Trump changed the rules. We can't just go back to this fake, insincere, pseudo-authenticity that is in fact completely inauthentic. We can't go back to that. Mark, time for Rush. We will take your calls.